Hi, I'm Erica Faulk,
And I'm Josh Greiff.
and for our final presentation today, we will be analyzing the Little Red Riding Hood.
Across the different versions or depictions of Little Red Riding Hood, there are varying levels of maturity aimed to teach lessons to young children that depend upon the severity of what can happen to them. We argue that across all of these versions, there are sexist depictions of not only the victim, the Little Red Riding Hood, but also her perpetrator and even her savior, and these contribute to stereotypes in our society. We set out to prove this by utilizing statistics and also analyzing tropes.
We believe that this is important because while most people are familiar with these stories, few come to realize how young they were when they were spoon-fed these difficult subjects. Aside from this, while it is good that these stories instill a sense of caution in our society, it inherently is problematic due to the sexist beliefs that come along with it.
We will begin by speaking of the most well-known version of the Little Red Riding Hood. It was written by Charles Perrault and published in France in 1697. First, let's describe the characters. Little Red Riding Hood is depicted as a little country girl, the prettiest creature who is ever seen. Perrault also states that both her mother and her grandmother were excessively fond of her. This is important to keep in mind for our analysis. Grandmother is portrayed as a weak, kind, old woman. The wolf is described as a large, wicked creature with an insatiable appetite for young girls. Now, let's briefly describe the plot of the version we all know well.
A beautiful young girl's mother tells her to visit her ill grandmother in another village. While traversing the woods, she encounters a wolf. The girl tells the wolf where she is going, and the wolf says that he will meet her there. The wolf arrives first, imitating the Little Red Riding Hood, and the grandmother tells him how to open the door. He eats her and then gets into the grandmother's bed. The Little Red Riding Hood finally arrives and gets into bed with who she believes to be her grandmother. Once she gets a better look at her grandmother, she begins to say the famous lines, "What big arms you have," continuing all the way to, "What big teeth you have." The story ends with the wolf eating her.
The moral of this story is children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers. We argue that this is the most simple and vague version of the moral, and that is because it is aimed at younger children from the ages of 2 to 10 years old. It is just vague enough to not explicitly explain the nature of the wolf as a sexual predator, but still warns kids to be wary of any adults that seem friendly.
We believe that part of the moral is accurate in depicting adult men who prey upon young women through the means of familiarity, such as a close family member or a friend. We corroborate this with statistics from the Department of Justice, which state that of all children who are preyed upon, 95 were preyed upon by adult males. Of these 95%, a whopping 75% of them were preyed upon by someone to whom they were acquainted with or knew by sight. This shows that this portion of the moral is accurate in warning children to be fearful of familiar adult figures, as the majority of children who are preyed upon will be done so by someone they know.
While this is a solid moral, we also want to emphasize the sexist nature of this story. This story insinuates that only young, pretty girls will be preyed upon. This is shown through Perrault describing her as a young, pretty girl and emphasizing her beauty throughout the story. This target audience lacks representation of the young boys who may also fall victim to familiar adults preying upon them. Unfortunately, this contributes to a stigma of young boys and in turn, men, who feel shame for coming forward as victims of sexual assault, even though this moral applies to men as well. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 52.4% of male victims report being raped by an acquaintance, while only 15.2% report being raped by a stranger. If this fable didn't solely focus on young, attractive females as possible victims of sexual violence, then the stigma surrounding male victims of sexual violence could be resolved.
Now we will dive into another version of The Little Red Riding Hood, published by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. This version is titled Little Red Cap. Here are the characters in this version. The Little Red Cap. She is described as being liked by everyone. The Little Red Cap's mother. The grandmother, who is the same as the previous version we described. The wolf, who is also the same. But now there is a courageous huntsman. Now with the story.
Just like before, the little red cap is told by her mother to bring cake and wine to her sick grandmother. Her mother emphasizes, do not leave the path, or you could fall down. She also says, do not forget to say good morning and don't peer into all the corners first. When she enters the woods, she meets a wolf, unbeknownst to his wickedness. Once again, the little red cap tells the wolf where she's going and the exact location of her grandmother's house. In this version, we get insight into the wolf's thoughts and come to learn that he thinks Little Red Cap will taste even better than the old woman. The wolf convinces her to go through the woods, and this causes the wolf to be able to arrive at the grandmother's house first. He imitates the Little Red Riding Hood, and the grandmother tells him how to open the door. He eats her and then gets into the grandmother's bed. Then, the little red cap arrives at her grandmother's. Foreshadowing as to what is about to come, the little red cap says, oh my God, why am I so afraid? I usually like it at my grandmother's.
Now, the same dialogue happens as the previous version, resulting in the little red cap being swallowed whole by the wolf. The wolf decides then to take a nap. A huntsman who is passing by picks up on the wolf's loud snoring and decides to go in to investigate. He encounters the wolf, realizes that he ate someone, and cuts the wolf's stomach open to retrieve the little red cap and her grandmother. Then the little red cap fetches some large stones and fills the wolf's stomach with them. This causes the wolf to die from the heavy weight of the stones when he wakes up. The hunter skins the wolf, and they all live happily ever after.
The moral of this story is aimed more at obeying parental figures. It also places more of an emphasis on a knight in shining armor, sweeping in and saving a weak girl. We argue that this story is aimed at older children and instills an attitude that girls must obey, whether it be their parents or their future husband, and if they do not, they will surely be swallowed by a wolf. While the huntsman and child trope is a bit different from the knight and princess trope, we argue that they have the same dynamic. Although the huntsman does not have any romantic or sexual motivations for saving the girl and her grandmother, unlike the knight, both the knight and the huntsman miraculously sweep in at the right moment to save the day.
In addition, the little red riding cap, the grandmother, and the princess are all in a powerless position with seemingly no escape, except in the little red riding cap and her grandmother are trapped in the wolf's stomach, and the princess is trapped in a tower or lair. Therefore, both tropes signify the helplessness and weak nature of women and the heroic, strong qualities of men. This creates an uneven power dynamic of both men saving women due to the fact that it is instilled in the minds of both boys and girls from a young age. These stereotypes and tropes are then subconsciously carried on by both men and women into adulthood. This could even be the escalating factor contributing to the divide between men and women in the form of compensation in the workplace. Now you might think, what is our justification for comparing these two versions?
I'm glad you asked. The differences between these two versions show how society strengthened traditional gender roles of men and women over time. Thoreau's version was published in 1697, while Grimm's version first appeared in 1812. Both of these literary works emphasize how the little girl is weak and beautiful, just as most of the versions of Little Red Riding Hood do. What does differ between these versions and later versions not discussed in this presentation is that a man frequently saves her in some shape or form. Specifically, the Little Red Riding Hood was eaten by the wolf and killed, but in the Little Red Cap, a huntsman comes in and saves her, and this is the sole reason why she survives.
So, to wrap things up, while the Little Red Riding Hood has a good moral for children on a surface level, it has deep undertones of sexist beliefs across all versions. The most simple and digestible version by Charles Perrault emphasizes that only young, pretty girls must be wary of strangers, and even those familiar to them. Grimm's version, being quite graphic, still highlights the importance of obeying parental figures and the need for men to swoop in and save the day.
Merci pour votre attention. Au revoir.